Why don't you do it on your own?
Because we're a national governing body
for,
and we
sir.
follow federal law.
That's what you're there for. Why don't you stand up and say in front of God and country, federal law is wrong, and the NCAA believes in fair competition. We also believe in equality. If you want to, in America, you can be whatever you want to be. You can be whomever you want to be. But our job is to promote fairness in sports.
Our job.
Biological males are not going to be allowed to compete against biological females. Why don't you go to Amazon and buy a spine online and take a stab?
Hello all, Jace here. I hope you guys are doing well, and thank you so much for watching the video. Recently, the Senate held hearings over the NCAA's response to transgender athletes in college sports. The first clip we're going to watch is Senator John Kennedy questioning Charlie Baker. He is the president of the NCAA over the issue of transgender women participating in women's sports.
Governor Baker, the NCAA exists in part to promote fair competition in collegiate sports, does it not? Yes. Could you speak in the mic for me?
Yes.
Okay. A transgender woman is a biological male. Is that correct?
Yes.
And a biological male is always going to have a physical and a physiological advantage competing in a collegiate sport against a biological female. Isn't that true?
There's not a lot of research on it, but it's certainly debatable.
You think it's debatable?
I think it's debatable.
You don't think?
I mean,
think that a biological male has an advantage every time competing against a biological female? Is that your testimony?
No, I think defined the way you defined it, yes, I would agree with you.
So you agree with me?
Yes.
Okay. So why does the NCAA, why do you, your job is to promote fairness in collegiate sports. Why do you support allowing transgender women who are biological males to compete against non-transgender biological females?
Over the course of the past 2 years, 5 federal court cases involving this question, let me finish. 5 federal judges have all sided with participation as the standard. This is a very...
So you're saying you don't have a choice?
I'm saying that under the current dynamic, there is not clarity on this issue legally.
Well, why don't you exhibit leadership and demonstrate leadership and provide clarity? If you agree with me,
well, first of all,
that the purpose of the NCAA is to promote fair competition, and if you agree with me that in every single instance, a biological male is going to have an unfair advantage over a biological female, then why don't you just say, look, in America you can be whomever you want to be, but in terms of fair competition in a collegiate sport, transgender women who are biological males are not going to be allowed to compete against non-transgender women who are biological female. Boom, done. Why don't you take that position, Charlie?
Because federal courts have already taken the position that they do have the right to compete.
Yeah,
5 times in the past year and a half.
You can disagree and be sued. Why don't you demonstrate some leadership?
I would love to work with you folks on creating clarity around this question.
I'm sorry, but look, I'm sure the NCAA is a good organization. I just can't figure out what you folks are good for. I know you take in bucket loads of money and you share some of it. You make that money off the backs of these kids. Your predecessor, who was a good man, took home $2.8 million a year in salary. I'm not going to ask you what you make, but I bet you didn't take a pay cut. You take in bucket loads of money. We got problems in collegiate sports with the transfer portal and the NIL and now gambling and biological males you allowing biological males to compete against biological females. And you folks at the NCAA don't do anything except sit there, watch, cash your checks, and suck on your teeth.
I would argue that we've made a lot of progress on a bunch of those
Why don't
issues.
you take a position on transgender biological males competing against females? You just told me it wasn't fair.
There's a federal standard on this is one that we would work with you on if you wish to work on it.
Why don't you do it on your own?
Because we're a national
what you're
governing
there
body
for,
and we
Charles.
follow federal law.
That's what you're there for. Why don't you stand up and say in front of God and country, federal law is wrong, and the NCAA believes in fair competition. We also believe in equality. If you want to, in America, you can be whatever you want to be. You can be whomever you want to be. But our job is to promote fairness in sports.
Our job.
Biological males are not going to be allowed to compete against biological females. Why don't you go to Amazon and buy a spine online and take a stand?
Okay, so a little background on Charlie Baker. He's the former governor of Massachusetts. He was governor from 2015 to 2023. He was elected as a Republican, but here's a small sampling of what he stood for. So you guys can judge for yourselves if he is a mega rhino or just a run-of-the-mill hyper rhino. He is pro-choice, opposed letting employers decide for themselves if they wanted to deny their employees birth control coverage based on their religious beliefs. Otherwise known as the Hobby Lobby case from the Supreme Court. He supported a law that guaranteed transgender people access to the bathroom of their choosing. He introduced police reform based on racial equity, that famous word equity that just makes absolutely no sense. He supported tough gun control laws, and he believes access to health care is a basic human right. Not exactly historic conservative principles. But he also stated that he was to the left of Obama on social issues. So, this is a Massachusetts Republican through and through. Next up, we got Senator Josh Hawley. He's got some follow-up questions over Baker's response to Kennedy's.
Mr. Baker, if I could just start with you. I confess I didn't understand your answer to Senator Kennedy's question about the safety of women in the sports of the NCAA overseas. Did you say the federal law requires the NCAA to permit biological men to play in women's sports?
No, I said there have been 5 cases in federal court in the past 18 months. And
okay, because I thought you told him that the reason the NCAA couldn't take a position on this, in fact, you have taken a position on it, you're affirmatively permitting biological men in women's sports. But you said to him it's because of federal law. There's no federal law that requires it, right? The relevant federal law is Title IX, is it not? You're familiar with Title IX.
If guidance on this issue from Title IX or guidance with respect to discrimination law would be
Title
important.
IX is already the law. Title IX says
federal judges have ruled on
this. It's 20 U.S.C. Section 1681A. By the way, let's just dispense with that canard. No federal court has ordered the NCAA to include biological men in women's sports, right? There's not a single case that has ordered the NCAA to do so, correct?
That's pretty much what they decided in the San
No, don't
Jose
say pretty
case.
much. We're talking about the law here.
Yes,
I know. And you actively dissembled to Senator Kennedy just a second ago. It's not true that the NCAA has been ordered by any court, number one. It's not true that federal law requires you to include biological males. In fact, Title IX explicitly says, no person in the United States shall on the basis of sex be denied the benefits of any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. You are in court at this moment arguing that Title IX doesn't apply to the NCAA, which is astounding to me, given the amount of money, federal money, the NCAA gets. But let me just ask you this. A total of 5 teams, 5 women's volleyball teams, Wyoming, Southern Utah, Utah State, Nevada, and Boise State all had to forfeit 7 games in their conference play, NCAA conference play this past year, women's teams, because a biological male under your rules was playing on a rival's team. How is that not denying them the benefits of the sport? Why is this fair to women?
And when that issue went to federal court, the judge sided with participation.
No, the NCAA did not go to court.
No,
that is
when
not true.
the federal judge made the decision with respect to the issue you just raised.
Your rules have not been tried in federal court, and your rules explicitly permit biological
Well, I don't think the little girl with the fractured face gets to participate anymore, at least not for a while.
males in women's sports. And I am asking you, why is that fair to the women? All of these women on these teams had to forfeit games and therefore a chance to compete in the championship because of your rules. And I want to know, why is that protective of women? That's my question.
So far, the federal government on the court side has issued decisions several
No,
times
I'm not
in the
asking you
last
about the
year.
courts. I know what the courts have done. Not one of them
that's
has
their
ordered the
interpretation of
NCAA.
federal law.
This is your policy, which you will not defend because, frankly, it's indefensible. Why are you, Mr. Baker, why are you allowing biological men to play in women's sports?
Because we believe that's consistent with federal policy.
So we're right back to your testimony is you believe you're compelled to do it by federal law. You would change it otherwise?
We believe our policy. I said in my opening comments to Senator Kennedy, the clarity on this issue at the federal level would be very helpful.
Oh, that is such a cop-out. In other words, somebody else please do it for us. Keep sending us the money. We'll go to court and argue that Title IX doesn't even apply to us.
We do not take a dime in federal money, not a dime.
Is that why you're arguing Title IX doesn't apply
No,
to you?
yes, part of it, yes.
You honestly think you shouldn't be subject to Title IX?
We don't believe we currently are. In federal court has
amazing.
Federal court has affirmed that on a
Absolutely
number of
amazing.
circumstances.
You have a pending lawsuit right now from female athletes who are suing you because you allow biological men not only in their sports but also in their locker rooms. Why do you do that, by the way? Why do your guidelines allow biological men into women's locker rooms without the women's consent? Without the women's foreknowledge? Why do you do that?
That's not what our guidelines say.
They do say that. I've got them right here. Your guidelines say that transgender student athletes should be able to use the locker room, shower, and toilet facilities in accordance with their gender identity.
And
Here
that
they are, right here.
And then everybody else should have an opportunity to use other facilities if they wish to do so.
Okay, so the burden's on the women. So if the women then want to move to a different facility, in other words, if they want to abandon their own locker room, you're saying that they should have to do that? So in other words, it's their problem?
No,
That's the deal?
we put a significant amount of emphasis on what the locals' plans are, and we make sure that everybody.
What does that mean, the locals' plans?
Whoever it is that's hosting the event.
You have guidelines that instruct them what the best practices are, and your guidelines say that biological men can go in and use the women's locker rooms if they want to. What the women want has nothing to do with it. They're not mentioned in here at all, correct? Correct. It's right here. You just reaffirmed them in May of this year. I've got them. I'm reading them. I've got them off your website.
I believe our guidelines give people optionality with respect to how they choose to use their facilities. And many,
What does that even mean? Optionality. What it says is transgender student athletes will be able to use the locker room, shower, and toilet in accordance with their gender identity. That means men will be able to use the women's locker rooms. And as Riley Gaines and others have testified before this committee, that means if a man, a biological man, wants to use their locker room, they just have to accept it. Or else the women have to go somewhere else. They've got to go find an alternative. Why is that fair?
We told the local folks who've hosted our tournaments they need to create accommodations for the people who are playing.
You know, so it's the feds on the one hand, it's the locals on the other hand. The only person who doesn't seem to bear any responsibility in this is you and the NCAA, who are the governing body. And your testimony here today is you're not even subject to Title IX. Mr. Baker, I can't tell you how disappointed this makes me, but not just disappointed, frankly, infuriated for the student athletes who are suffering because of your policies, and you won't even defend them. You won't even take responsibility. It's outrageous.
Okay, and there's no denying that. I mean, they've talked about it. It's been well documented that, and I cannot even imagine, and for those of you out there who are parents, especially of girls, can you even imagine your kid is in a locker room and some dude comes in there, starts stripping down and goes and jumps in the shower with them? I mean, can you even imagine? Number one, how mad you would be. Number two, how uncomfortable they must feel. Number three, what the heck is wrong with these guys that they're going in there and doing that? And then the coaches, they're over a barrel on it. I mean, if they take a stand, and the vast majority of them probably think it's wrong, but if they take a stand, they're going to get accused of a hate crime. It's a no-win situation, the way the laws are currently established. Now, these guys, and I know it's terribly insensitive to call them guys without knowing their preferred pronouns, but hey, all three of them present as white men, so who cares how they feel anyway, right? They got into the weeds of the legality of the practice of men and women's sports, but and I think you are much more concerned about the effects of it. Now, one of the most famous trans athletes, of recent note, is our old friend Leah Thomas. He was a mid to low tier male college swimmer until he decided that he was a girl, and has since dominated the women's field. Now, he recently won the NCAA Women's National Championship in the 500-yard freestyle with a time of 4 minutes and 33 seconds. For context, the man who finished dead last in the 2024 men's NCAA finals in that same event had a time of 4 minutes and 14 seconds. Now, I'm not saying this to insult that young man. He still made it to the NCAA finals, which is laudable on its own. I only say it to illustrate that the guy who finished last in the finals still beat Thomas's championship winning time by a full 19 seconds. Now, trans powerlifter Ann Andres, who you can see here, and yes, both of those pictures are of the same person, is not only winning every competition he enters, because he's a dude, but has the balls to insult and call women out on social media about it.
Welcome to Anne Says Something Controversial. Why is women's bench so bad? I mean, not compared to me. We all know that I'm a tranny freak, so that doesn't count. And no, we're not talking about Mackenzie Lee. She's got little T-Rex arms, and she's like 400 pounds of chest muscle, apparently.
It was dinosaur shaming.
Standard bench in powerlifting competition for women, I literally don't understand why it's so bad. My son, he weighs 45 pounds. His max bench is like 33. I'm legit seeing some women in competition who are doing something like 50 pounds, and I just don't understand it.
Okay, in response to not only this guy, entering women's competitions and beating them all, but also getting on social media and trash talking them, Avi Silverberg, pictured here, he's the head coach of Team Canada Powerlifting. He recently entered a powerlifting competition identifying as a woman and broke Andres' record by almost 100 pounds. Now, my immediate reaction was, good for him, that shows this other guy, whatever. But the more I thought about it, the less I liked it. All this really did was set a new record that no natural born woman will ever have any hope of breaking. Now, on average, men are taller, have more lean body mass, greater muscle strength, larger heart and lungs, higher maximal oxygen consumption, more red blood cells. The list of biological advantages men have over women goes on and on. Getting estrogen injections or suppressing testosterone does not remove these inherent advantages that men have over women, and they are present regardless of age. Puberty does magnify the differences, but they exist no matter what age or stage in development a person is. I don't care what the pink-haired liberals want to say about it. The point of sports is very simple: to work hard and be the best. We don't watch professional sports or the Olympics, or college sports for that matter, because it was super inclusive or it looked like the athletes were having a really good time out there. Nor is that why any of the athletes push their bodies to the absolute limits every single day in training. They do it, and we watch to see who the best is going to be. You can't take the spirit of competition out of the human psyche, no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try. We are hardwired to compete, and most of us are hardwired to take offense to and rail against unfair competition. I really enjoy a lot of women's sports for the same reason I enjoy men's sports. It's fun to watch people who are at the peak of their craft battle it out to see who is going to prevail. That's why they compete, and that's why we watch. And that spirit of competition is being disintegrated by governing bodies allowing men to compete against women that have literally no hope of training hard enough, practicing often enough, studying technique enough to overcome the inherent physical differences that they have no control over. Now, back to the Senate hearing and Charlie Baker's statements. Honestly, he's not really wrong here. I'm not a legal expert, but I don't think he is. I told you about his policies while he was governor. The NCAA knew full well who they were hiring before they did it, and it only makes sense to think that he was given a mandate by the organization to push through the policies within the NCAA that aligned with his beliefs as a politician. Title IX is a civil rights law that bans sexual discrimination against students and employees at public schools and universities that receive federal funding. Biden further added rules to it for LGBTQ that guaranteed them protection under the law if they are discriminated against for their gender identity or sexual orientation. Now, number one, the NCAA does not receive federal funding and does not fit under the Title IX umbrella at all. The NCAA gets their money from selling broadcast rights. 90% of their funding comes from March Madness, but that's where they get their money from. Number two, and far more importantly, why are these senators condemning Baker and the NCAA for not standing up to the federal laws that they are the ones in a position to change? Sure, it'd be nice if the NCAA stood up against men participating in women's sports like many other sports organizations have done, and their governing bodies have put bans in place. But isn't it a bit ironic that the legislators are asking Baker why he isn't defying the laws their institution created and is still in support of? Like Jordan Peterson says, take some responsibility and clean your own room.